Let's begin this hour with some interesting developments in Syria, where one we do know is, of course, murky and often comes in video snippets and unconfirmed reports. But of the biggest questions, one of them is about the strength and supplies of those battling the Assad regime. Well, now there may be some answers. The arms trade in Syria is now being documented in an unlikely place, on Pinterest. For those of you unfamiliar with Pinterest, it's essentially an online pin board. Most people go on to pin recipes of dishes they hope to make, wedding dresses and centerpieces they like, and ideas to give rooms in their home a makeover. But now a group of reporters, including some affiliated with publications like the New York Times, are sharing information, pictures, and data from Syria. Take a look. These are images of weapons in possession of anti-government fighters in Syria. You can see some of them are actually marked with the impression, "Made in Iraq." But these extra what's pretty clear, though, is that these photos of these weapons come from a variety of places. They've been reported to have come from Saudi Arabia. When the White House is asked about it, very little, of course, is revealed, though we did get this from the Vice President Joe Biden at last week's vice presidential candidates debate.
We are in the process now and have been for months in making sure that help, humanitarian aid, as well as other aid and training is getting to those forces that we believe, the Turks believe, the Jordanians believe, the Saudis believe are the free forces inside of Syria. That is underway.
So the question, of course, many people are, still wondering to this day is about this aid and where it's coming from. And also a question that's not asked nearly enough: who exactly are the rebels? To talk more about this, Nick Jensen-Jones, military small arms and ammunition specialist, joining us from Australia. Nick, Pinterest is better known for its wedding inspirations. Talk about your role in what we've been seeing on these Pinterest boards, and also about the thought process behind using it to sort of crowdsource information about the Syrian arms conflict.
Sure. Look, I can't speak to Pinterest specifically. It's not a platform I use, but WordPress, Facebook, Twitter, forums, blogs, and so on. Certainly social media is playing an important role, not only in arms tracing, but also in arms analysis.
It's becoming more clear, Nick, that some of these weapons are coming from so many different places. I know we heard recently, the BBC talking about weapons coming from Saudi Arabia. We've heard weapons coming from Ukraine. I guess this demonstrates, on one hand, just how difficult it is to get good information about these weapons. But talk a little bit about, give us some hints about how you track these weapons.
Absolutely. Look, first off, I might just mention that we haven't seen weapons from Saudi Arabia. We've seen small arms ammunition that appears to have originated from the Saudi armed forces. So that was produced, as we discovered, in the Ukraine, and then obviously shipped to the Saudi Arabians, and from there seems to have ended up in Syria somehow. Tracking weapons is an interesting subject. It's always difficult. We use a very collaborative approach wherever possible, and like I say, social media has made this a lot easier for us. As you mentioned at the top of the segment, people like CJ Schiffers from the New York Times, right through to amateurs who are sitting at home and just have the time to browse through hours and hours of video. And then we get people like myself who are more specialists to come in and sort of help identify the arms themselves. So it's certainly a collaborative effort, and it's something that's only happened in recent conflicts. Libya and Syria have been two very good sort of testing grounds, crucibles for this sort of work. So it's something that's developing, but I think it's got very positive outcomes.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. When you talk about the need to pool information, we've seen just how difficult it is for reporters to even get into places like Syria and Libya to actually cover the conflict. Do you think, I guess, what do you think this will help do by collaborating and pooling this information?
Yeah. Look, I hope we can get a clearer picture not only of what arms are what, but also where they're coming from and where they're going. So it's one thing for us to look at arms and identify what the weapon is, and that lets people on the ground handle them safely and take the appropriate procedures to protect themselves. But it's another thing also to look not only where the arms come from, but also where might they go. In Libya already we're seeing signs that perhaps some of the weapons have left the country and end up in neighbouring regions. So I think by working together and pooling all our data, we can get a bigger picture across the region, and we can try and understand the flow of arms.
It was something that was really interesting to us here in the RT newsroom was on some of these weapons, this made in Iraq stamp. It's a little confusing because, of course, the current Iraqi government supports Bashar al-Assad. and would therefore most likely not be sending weapons to the rebels.
Sure.
Not to mention that very few people believe any weapons are actually being manufactured in Iraq these days, or have been really since Saddam was in power. So talk a little bit about these made in Iraq weapons and what they might tell us.
Absolutely. Look, the weapons I've seen so far that have been made in Iraq and turning up in Syria appear to have been produced during the reign of Hussein and not post Hussein. So it looks like they're being supplied, as best we can tell, predominantly along tribal lines. We've seen Tabuk rifles, which are a designated marksman's rifle. We've seen some heavy machine guns, the DSHKM variety, and also, of course, RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenade launchers. Of course, we've also seen a transfer, what we think is a transfer of IED technology. So it appears that there have been some sort of sharing of techniques in terms of how to manufacture improvised explosive devices. So it looks like there is definitely some support there. But again, we think at this stage it's organised along tribal lines as opposed to a government-backed effort.
What surprised you the most in kind of what you've seen and what you've been able to analyze in terms of these weapons and where they come from?
It's a difficult question. We've seen, perhaps the answer for this is the breadth of weapons. We've seen firearms from across the world, from neighbouring regions, from neighbouring countries rather, also from within the region a bit broader, and also firearms that date from the 30s and 40s right through to modern weapons. So there's definitely a big range of small arms there, and we don't have a complete picture. And the only way we get that complete picture is like I say, by collaborating and by getting people on the ground to liaise with people with perhaps expertise who aren't there.
So some of these weapons have been around literally for 60 or 70 years. I mean, that's fascinating.
Absolutely, yeah.
But Nick, it's not just the origin of the weapons in Syria. I think another important question is the origin of the rebels, who they are, what they want. And why do you think, Nick, the media, at least here in the U.S., has focused so little attention on finding this out?
Look, that's really not something I'm comfortable talking about. It's not my area at all. I have heard a wide range of theories. I think it's certainly important to understand that, particularly if we're going to be supporting, we in the broader Western sense are going to be supporting the rebel groups or even supporting foreign governments to support the rebel groups. It's certainly a question that needs to be asked. And I think it, like you say, it hasn't received the attention it deserves. But it's not something I can answer. Yeah,
no, absolutely. So in your expertise, I mean, you sort of study precisely what these weapons are and try to get a better understanding. What dots do you think, and of course there's still a lot of information that's not out there quite yet, but of what you've seen so far, what dots have you been able to connect?
Yeah, well, like you say, it's an interesting process, and looking at the weapons and also the ammunition helps us determine not only where they've come from, but where they might go. So I think we've seen some obvious evidence of supply through Turkey, obvious evidence of supply through Iraq and through Lebanon. They're the three that we've been able to sort of pinpoint. We've seen Iranian and Egyptian supply lines. Difficult to tell how recent they are. And of course, the Chinese have backed the Assad government with firearms for some time. So there's that range of weaponry at least. What would be nice now is to look at the ammunition. It's something that gets overlooked. It's all very nice to look at a firearm, but sometimes looking at the small arms ammunition can help provide a picture of when weapons have been resupplied, so when ammunition has been provided to people to keep weapons operational. I think that's a critical part of the puzzle that we're missing.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, I think one of the questions here too, Nick, is how this process works. I mean, this is not something that, the rebel army shows up to a warehouse and gets their weekly supply of weapons. Any idea how the process works? I mean, it's so interesting how many different places they're coming from, how many different eras they're coming from, but how do they actually get into their hands?
It is fascinating. We've seen not only the cross-border smuggling from Lebanon or from Turkey and from Iraq in small quantities. We've seen organised, or what we believe to be organised smuggling across the Iraqi border, for example. Like I say, again, along tribal lines. We've seen what appears to be state support in the form of Iranian deliveries of what we think are high explosive mortars. And then we've seen, obviously, civilian firearms turning up in the fighters' arms, shotguns, hunting rifles, those sort of things, that have been either purchased over the borders or from private collections. So there's definitely a range of ways that weapons are acquired, but the one that's perhaps most important to the fighters is battlefield capture. It's raiding facilities of Assad's troops and taking those firearms and redistributing them to the rebels.
Certainly multiple factions and strategies at work here. I really appreciate your analysis. Nick Jensen-Jones, military small arms and ammunition specialist, joining us from Perth, Australia.